Hey, Saretsky here. Welcome back to the show. I want to touch on a couple things today that I think are really important. And in this, you guys know that I've been following this show. I typically don't get overly political on this. I try to keep that stuff out because I just think politics is such a dirty game. It's kind of a lose-lose. But there are times where I feel like I need to leverage the voice that I've built, the following that we have here, the Loonie Hour, 50,000 weekly views, the Substack that has, OSFI on there, Bank of Canada, liberal politicians, conservative politicians. And so I feel at times I have to speak out when I think something really sort of bothers me that I need to get out there and off my chest, and hopefully can enlighten a few people to at least steer the conversation in a direction. And, there was two big lies that were told this week, and they just didn't sit well with me. And so, the first lie was, from the Liberal government around housing. And so they've been putting out all these tweets and saying, we've got all these new housing programs that we've created, and we're going to build 3.9 million homes by 2031. 3.9 million homes. Well, let me just put that into context for you. The record high for annual housing completions in this country was 274,000 units completed back in 1974. And actually, a lot of those units are mobile home units, mobile home parks. And so what the federal government is saying that by producing 3.9 million homes by 2031 over the next 7 years, they're going to have to double. They're going to have to double the all-time record high of 274,000 home completions. And they're going to have to do it consistently every single year for the next 7 years. And they're going to do that with interest rates at their highest levels in 20 years. And as we're teetering on a recession and a lack of confidence in the housing and home building sector. And again, just to put that into further context, basically they'd have to build 1,528 homes a day or 64 homes per hour for the next 7 years straight. No weekends off, no stat holidays, just build, baby, build. And again, just the ridiculousness of this statement is so false. It is so misleading. We won't even hit, I will put my reputation on the line, we won't hit 2 million homes by 2031, let alone 4 million homes, okay? So that's lie number one. And why I say it is because it's segueing into the next big lie. The next big lie came in the federal budget, where they increased the capital gains inclusion rate in this country, in which they said, don't worry, it will only impact 0.13% of Canadians. We're going after the ultra-rich people that aren't paying their fair share. They're trying to create this divide, this social, this class warfare that is just gross. Like, this country is becoming so divided, and these politics around race and gender and division, and now we're getting into the wealth politics of it. It's just a lie. If we really unpack this further, I'll say this here, preface it. So I myself, I am impacted by this, full disclosure, but let's be honest, nobody cares about me. Nobody cares about realtors being impacted by this. But I want to touch on this because I'm incorporated, so I understand how incorporations work. And when I kind of mention this on Twitter, the rebuttals that come back through are from. It's clear that these rebuttals are coming back from salaried employees that have no idea how incorporations work. They don't understand how the whole tax system works, but they have a strong opinion on it, and they're just parroting basically what the Liberal government handbook has told them to say. How this works is they increase the capital gains inclusion rate. And they said, well, for the first 250K, there's no impact. And, after that, but where there is an impact is on Corporations, there's no 250K limit. So corporations are automatically getting any single dollar that is earned through capital gains, whether it's a $1, $10, or $10,000, is going to be taxed at the higher inclusion rate. And so, well, you say, well, what about corporations? Who's impacted by corporations? Well, there's a lot of corporations out there, not just realtors that are incorporated, but I look at it and say, who cares about the realtors? Look at the medical profession, right? Think about the doctor. Everybody likes doctors. So let's talk about doctors. Doctors are impacted. Dentists are impacted. Chiropractors, RMTs, the list goes on, small businesses, accountants, lawyers, anyone that's incorporated their business. So you've gone out there, you've taken some economic risk. You have an employee, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 employees. You have overhead, you hire, you outsource freelancing work to marketing people, et cetera, et cetera. You're out there, you don't have a stable income, you don't have a pension, you've taken risk. And so the incentive for that is typically that you can incorporate. And by incorporating, you can sort of determine how much salary you want to take in a particular year, depending on how your revenues and doing it. So look at this through, let's just say, a medical doctor. And I've got clients that are medical doctors incorporated. A lot of doctors, for example, here in BC, are in fact incorporated. And so how this works basically is if you're a medical doctor, you are going to be incorporated and you're going to bill, hourly and how many clients you see, and you're going to be paid into your corporation. You don't get a pension, okay? So you are earning through your corporation. At the end of the year, you're going to pay yourself a salary. So a doctor might earn, let's say, $500,000, but they say, well, I don't need $500,000. I need $200,000. So you pay, your normal income tax on your $200,000, and now you have, retained earnings after you've paid your corporate taxes, of course, and all the other taxes that are involved there. You have retained earnings. Now, what most doctors will do is you'll open up a holding company, and you will invest your retirement savings in that holding company. So as opposed to just putting it into like an RRSP, you would put it into a holding company, and you would, you invest in stocks, bonds, whatever, GICs, maybe it's investment properties. And you would, the advantage of that is it's deferred, like you're not paying the salary taxes on those income that you're saving in the corp, right? Because if you say, well, why don't you just put it into your RSP, right? So if you're going to contribute, let's say $30,000 to your RSP that year, you then have to draw a higher salary and pay all the income taxes that are applicable to that salary, only to then put it into RSP to get the tax deferred investment down the line. So it's kind of like a circular. So in many cases, the advice from tax accountants is like, for a lot of these medical professionals, it's not really to actually put a lot of money into your RSP. It's actually just to keep it in the corp and defer it through an holding company. So basically what's happening here is when the government says only 0.13% are impacted, no, any individual that is incorporated, again, doctors, dentists, chiropractors, etc., are all going to be impacted. All of their retirement savings that are invested through holding companies, which is very pervasive and predominant, are impacted. And so I'm scratching my head because I'm going, man, like, aren't we short doctors? Aren't we trying to actively recruit and get more doctors in this horrible Canadian healthcare system? And the solution is to raise taxes on them? I don't consider a doctor living in Vancouver to be a rich person. Yeah, you're a high income earner, but let's be honest. I mean, you're paying 50% tax bracket. There's not a whole lot after you start paying all those taxes. You're not a rich person. You're well-to-do. You're better off. You're certainly in the upper middle class, but you're not a rich person. The same thing applies to all these businesses. They talk about, well, the lifetime capital gains exemption. If you sell your business, you get up to the 1.25 million, tax free. It's like, yeah, but most businesses, if you're a doctor, for example, you're not selling a business. You're just a person that's earning a salary income, right? Same thing as like if you're a realtor, there's no business book to sell. You just, when you're done in 30 years, you just retire and you're gone. There's no pension, there's no business sale. And it's the same thing for like a lot of small businesses in Canada. There is no succession plan. Like, you have a small plumbing company with like 3 employees. Like when the main guy retires, like that's usually typically it. There is no succession plan. There is no sale of the business. And so a lot of the times it's basically just like you're in retirement, you're living off of whatever your holding company has accumulated in assets. And so that's by hitting these people with increased taxation. Like what is the goal here? And so I'm just left scratching my head. It's basically a conversation of like, is the government better off with this money, or is the private sector and the individual better off with the money? Because all I keep seeing is increased taxation. I'm not seeing better services. I'm not seeing, more expedient lines at the hospitals. I'm not seeing better, quicker turnaround at the passport office. Like everything seems to be getting worse, but yet the taxes are increasing to a bloated public sector that produces nothing. We talk about, the lack of productivity in this country. The Bank of Canada has to come out and says, hey, this is a productivity emergency. And we wonder why. It's because we continue to disincentivize entrepreneurs and risk takers by removing and taxing them. And we can see this in the growth in the labor force. All the growth over the last 4 or 5 years has been in the public sector. So is everyone moving forward just going to work for the government, work for CRA, and CRA just gets bigger and everyone just collects taxes off of each other? It's just, I really can't fathom how poor of a policy this is. And you see guys like, David Rosenberg, David Dodge, former Bank of Canada guy, come out and say how poor of a policy this is. Former Finance Minister Bill Morneau says this is the worst policy, and he, adequately rejected it during his tenure. Again, we did a great interview with Robert Asselin on the Loonie Hour this week. I'd highly encourage you to go listen to that, an hour long, where we really unpack, I think, all of the issues here. And so this kind of leads me also to, my next conversation, which is like, the real estate side, right? We talked about at the beginning of the show, the government says, listen, we're going to build 3.9 million homes over the next 7 years. The biggest lie I've ever heard, but they're going to do it. And so you're like, well, hold on a minute. How are you going to do that? You need investment. People need to invest into real estate and into development, right? I mean, like developers, they have capital partners that have to allocate funds to these projects. You then have pre-sale investors that then have to absorb the pre-sale units in order to get construction finance. So any building that gets built in Canada today requires capital. And by saying, well, listen, we're going to tax capital. We're going to tax that capital, and we're going to pull it out of the economy, and we're going to put it in the government coffers, is actually counterintuitive to producing more supply. So everything the government's done in the last 4 or 5 weeks around housing, a lot of it has actually been pretty good policy that, should encourage more housing supply to get built over the longer term. But this is actually counterintuitive and does the exact opposite. And so we're kind of just going around in circles. And the one thing I'll tell you this is like, I chat with developers on a regular basis. I chat with commercial lenders. I know what's happening in the space. Housing starts are getting decimated. You wait to see that show up in the housing data over the next 12 months. I can assure you it's going to be ugly. There's a lot of developers that are hurting. They're going to go bust. And again, I know nobody has sympathy for the developers. That's totally fine. But housing starts are going to continue to roll over. And it's just amazing, right? I mean, like I said, in order to get projects built in this country, developers need to pre-sell typically 60% of the units via pre-construction in order to get construction financing to put a shovel in the ground. And so the reason why most of these units sell to investors and not end users is predominantly because end users, the reality is end users don't want to wait 3 to 4 years for the end product. An end user, a first-time home buyer, has money today. They want to move in tomorrow. Okay, they don't want to wait 4 years. And this is why the predominant absorption on the pre-sale side, whether we like it or agree with it or dislike it, is done through the investor channel. And so again, I just look at it and say, the more investment dollars and the more discouraging of investment that you portray to these people, the less housing supply you'll get. So I just think it's kind of a careful what you wish for moment. I think it's incredibly discouraging. Like I said, I think there's not a lot of sympathy, of course, for people in the real estate space. Totally get it. Don't blame you. But I look at it and say, man, like, think about all these doctors. Think about all these estates, right? Like, who here is like maybe a salaried employee, but like you're going to inherit, your parents' wealth or estate when they go to pass away. I mean, that's capital gains. And so, our publicly traded companies now are going to be paying higher rates of taxation on their capital gains to the federal government. Do you own any Canadian equities? Do you own them in your TFSA? Do you own them in your pension plan? So everyone is being impacted by this. To say 0.13% is perhaps the biggest lie next to the 4 million homes going to be built over the next 7 years. And so, again, I hate to kind of ramble on, and I just look at this and say, the solution in Canada just seemingly seems to be a new tax. Everywhere you go, it's just the solution is a new tax. I look at, and I always, rising income taxes, capital gains taxes. You look at the capital gains taxes, we're now ranked third highest in the OECD. That's something to be excited about. Third highest capital gains rate in the OECD. Is that a good thing? We have one of the highest income tax rates already in the OECD. And so I'm just struggling to see how this is going to alleviate the productivity issues in this country, where we're discouraging investment. We're pulling money. We're pulling capital out of the economy and giving it to the least productive entity, which is the federal government, to allocate. The guys that spent hundreds of millions of dollars on an Arrive Can app. Again, I really hope that, we can figure it out soon and we can pivot and go in a different direction. I just worry. And like I said, you talk to any of these accountants that are in the space and just pick up the phone, call them, ask them, who's this going to impact? How's it going to impact people? And to say 0.13% of people, it's unfortunate because, like I said, a lot of the comments, the rebuttals are typically from people that don't actually understand the mechanics of incorporations and holdcos and how they work, and thinking that like business people are somehow tax cheats and they're not paying their fair share.